All right, our second lecture is going to deal with the judicial branch. And what I really want to clear up in this lecture is the idea of jurisdiction. I want to make sure you understand the 4 different types of jurisdiction that we're going to cover. I really want you to think about jurisdiction as power. Power within a set radius. And so the example I like to use is getting pulled over by a police officer. If you're speeding inside of the city of Hastings, you can get pulled over, obviously, by Hastings City Police. If you leave that area, they don't have the jurisdiction or authority to pull you over. If you're in that area, the Dakota County Sheriffs could pull you over, though. Now, if you're driving down Main Street in Hastings and speeding, the Dakota County Sheriff can still pull you over. They have that jurisdiction in a bigger area, so we can see that they have more authority. Once you leave Dakota County, that sheriff can no longer pull you over, but a state patrol officer could. So a state patrol officer could pull you over inside Hastings City, inside Dakota County, and anywhere inside the state of Minnesota. Once you leave Minnesota, that state patrol officer loses jurisdiction. On the other hand, a Federal Bureau of Investigations officer could pull you over. Not that they're going to pull you over for speeding, but they have the jurisdiction to go anywhere in the United States. Now, when we talk about the judicial branch, the first thing then, before we get to jurisdiction, is our philosophy. What is our principal goal? What is our underlying belief system dealing with justice? And it really comes down to this idea of equal justice for all. So what's the role of our judicial system? It's to settle disputes. We have adults who can't agree peacefully. For whatever reason, they can't decide how to resolve their conflict. So the court has authority to tell them what to do. Think about it like 2 little kids arguing. If we just let the little kids argue, at some point somebody gets punched. What we do is have parents or babysitters or teachers or somebody that has authority that can wield power over them. Again, think back to our philosophers. Without somebody in power, we descend towards the natural state, which leads towards anarchy. Again, this is that whole idea of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So we still come back to this question of how do we all get along? In this term, what we're really talking about is people aren't getting along. We need somebody to force them to do it. These disputes can be between private parties. So think about just 2 adults who disagree. This is business contracts. I buy a car and the engine falls out. I want my money back. The person who sold it to me says, well, I sold it as is. How do we resolve that? This can be between the private party and the government. Anytime a crime is committed, it is not charged by an individual. The charges are never filed by the victim. The charges are filed by the state of Minnesota. What we see then would be the state of Minnesota, Dakota County, the city of Hastings, the United States, versus the person who committed the crime. These disputes can also be between a government and the U.S. government. We had that with the health care. The recent health care law that Obama and the Democratic Senate and House passed was challenged on constitutional grounds by a variety of states. I think the total was about 32. Don't quote me on that, though. 32 roughly states sued the United States government and said, we're not going to follow your law. This went to the Supreme Court, and then 5-4 they decided the law was constitutional. Now, our process. So how do we resolve disputes? What the courts do is apply the law. So they look at these laws and then they say, how does this fit this situation? And then they just decide who is more right and who is more wrong. So they decide in favor of one or the other. Criminal trials are held for people who are accused of a crime. You really think about crime, and we'll talk about this more second semester, as breaking any rule you should have learned in kindergarten, which is don't touch somebody that doesn't want to be touched, don't say something to somebody that doesn't want it said, and don't touch people's stuff unless they share. If you really think about it, every law that somebody breaks is a violation of those 3 simple rules that you should have learned in kindergarten. Don't do things to other people you wouldn't want done to you. When we get serious, as far as like breaking and entering, assault, rape, burglary, homicide, these are all very serious actions that are really just extensions of that underlying philosophy. Civil trials, on the other hand, are where there's no crime, but 2 people disagree. These are contracts, these are marriages, these are divorces, these are car accidents. This is just 2 people who have a disagreement. Nobody has necessarily committed a crime, but we need to resolve these conflicts. Now, what is our philosophy then? How do we want to apply justice? And we really have this first idea, which I think is critical. I wish the media would follow this idea. We don't. We talked about this a little bit in class with the accused coach down in Mankato State University. But people are innocent until proven guilty. That's because what we take away from people is the most valuable thing they have, not their freedom, their time. You cannot give someone time back. If you think about it, there is nothing you can do, no amount of money you can spend to go back to being younger. And this isn't that important now, because right now all you want is to be older. But I'm 37. And I got to tell you, at about 60, I would be very happy if there was a way for me to go back to 37 or 40 or 25 or something. I wouldn't want to be 15 again. 15 sucks. But I will be honest, time is the most valuable thing we have. You think about this situation. I talk about my child all the time in class. If I was accused of a crime and they locked me up before it was proven that I was guilty for 2 years, they put me in jail for 2 years, there is nothing that could be done to give me back those 2 years that I lost with my kid. That's far more valuable than my freedom. That's far more valuable than any amount of money I have. That's why we talk about our soldiers and how we honor them for the amount of sacrifice they give. So our philosophy is, you are innocent until we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty. There's this quote, it's better that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to jail. And that's why you see all of these second chances, all of these appeals courts, all of these rights of the accused that we'll study second semester. And so what we see is this strong desire that the government has to be perfect before they put you in jail. Unfortunately, we do see travesties of justice where people we really, really believe are guilty get out. But our goal is to make sure no one who is innocent goes to jail. All accused people have a right to a public trial. That way they can't do things behind closed doors. In all honesty, if you're sitting there in a meeting with the principal and there are issues and it's a one-on-one meeting, you have the right to say, I want somebody else in the room. I want a counselor. I want a teacher. I want another principal. I want my mom. I want somebody who can be in this room to hear what you're saying and hear what I'm saying. And the principal really shouldn't be afraid of that situation. You have the right to make sure that things are fair. A court has to appoint an attorney if you can't afford one. We'll watch a movie that deals with the case that granted this. This is critical. You don't know the law well enough to defend yourself. One of the most important attorneys in the history of America, one of the best attorneys, when he was accused of a crime, the first thing he did was hire an attorney. Because it's so important to have somebody else fighting this battle for you who understands the rules. All right, our federal court system. We talked about Article 3 of the Constitution. What it does is make sure we have a Supreme Court. It gives Congress the power to create as many courts as we need. Our country has grown exponentially since it was founded. Remember, the Constitution was 1787. We've grown from 13 states to 50, plus, let's be honest, an empire of military bases around the world. So we need more courts to deal with all of the problems that arise. Each state is allowed to set up its own laws and its own court system, but remember, we have the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution that says nothing anybody or any state does can violate the Constitution. So states can pass laws, but they have to follow the federal law. We see disputes over this all the time. Right now, marijuana is illegal for any purpose, for any reason, for everyone in this country, according to federal law. Well, we have our states that pass different laws that are violating federal law. So in theory and in practice, in California, people go get a note from a doctor that says they can get marijuana for medical reasons. The local police do not have the jurisdiction now to arrest them because they are not breaking state law or city law. The federal government does go in and arrest people all the time for breaking that law. So it doesn't matter that Montana and Washington made it legal to use marijuana. The federal government, if they choose to, can enforce that law that says it's still illegal. Jurisdiction then. Let's break this down. Again, the key is understanding what these words mean. Jurisdiction just simply means a court's authority to hear a case. Who gets the right to decide a case? Think about me in teaching civics. If I have you in my civics class, I get jurisdiction over your grade. If you're taking civics with Mr. Hahn, I have no jurisdiction over your grade. I don't have any ability to say anything about your grade. Exclusive jurisdiction is what somebody has if they are the only person. Exclusive means only person or group that has jurisdiction. So in this case, only that court can hear the case. I would elaborate and say, think about this. Your parents have exclusive jurisdiction over you at home. They're the only people really who have the authority to say where you go to school, how you're raised, how much TV you watch, simple things like that. Concurrent jurisdiction is where we share it. For example, I share power with the principals and the counselors. I get your grade, but in all honesty, there are people who can override me. I can send you down for detention, but the principal can say, no, that isn't worth detention, so we're not going to give it to you. Sometimes a case could be heard at a state or a federal level. There's a variety of reasons that federal courts can hear a case. The main thing is to understand that it deals with multiple states, multiple countries, or issues dealing with constitutional questions. So if it deals with the U.S. Constitution. If it involves federal law, like the marijuana laws. If it's a disagreement between two states, how do we let one state decide? We can't. We have to have somebody with more power. If it deals with citizens of different states, because who's following which law? For example, you can drink in Wisconsin with your parents. You can't in Minnesota. What happens if your parents take you to Wisconsin, they let you drink over there where it's legal, and then they drive back into Minnesota and you're arrested and your parents get charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor? The crime occurred in Wisconsin. Which law is correct? We would just work our way up right to federal. If the government is suing or being sued by someone, yes, you can sue the government. The weird thing is you go to the government for them to decide if they're wrong. This is the idea that nobody's above the law, even the government. If it involves disputes between foreign governments and the U.S. government, obviously the state of Minnesota can't tell another government what to do. Accidents or crimes on the high seas, that deals with the oceans, the Great Lakes, where it borders between two countries, and the Gulf of Mexico. And if it involves U.S. diplomats, representatives to other countries. The last thing I want to say is this. When we talk about our court system, it's a way to resolve disputes between people who can't resolve them. The reason we don't have national disputes in our country that devolve into bloodshed is because we have courts. The reason we have wars is because we do not have a single government that can tell countries what to do. Wars are simply the next step in disagreements, because there's no way for the United States government to force a country to listen to us through a court system. So we do it through economic sanctions, foreign policy, or if they don't listen, that's when we send troops. All right, hopefully you figured this stuff out. We will talk Monday. Be prepared for a quiz.